Chapter 17. No one needed any encouragement to get up and start marching again. They headed off at a brisk pace, eating up the miles as they talked and hypothesized endlessly about the dragon and rider they had seen and what it meant to the enemy army as a whole. Dragon men and dragons had been excitedly proclaimed more than once with a sense of dread. What else were they going to encounter before this was all over? How could they possibly hope to make any difference against an enemy so powerful the last time they were defeated was at the legendary hands of Humor himself? That dragon wasn't looking for us, was it? Cielo asked Hitch as they marched along side by side. No, little one, they wouldn't send out such a creature to hunt the likes of us. Hitch tried his best to reassure her. Pay no attention to what the others are saying. They may be knowing what they're talking about at the best of times when they're discussing the crops they plant. No dragon was sent out to look for a little group like us. He paused for a moment, his ears pricking up as the sound came to him again. Ooh! The cry of the dog carried on the wind. Hitch held up his hands for silence, and the group paused to wonder what was going on. It came again, louder and longer than before. The dragon wasn't looking for us, but those dogs are. Hitch called out to the group as they looked around. Someone noticed the movement in the distance and saw the human-like figures running alongside the dogs as their muzzles went side to side, tracking the scent. Quick, young one, get out your tinderbox. Hitch instructed Cielo as he whipped out his knife and cut a thick bundle of the long grass. He quickly wrapped it around into a knot while he ordered the others to head south as fast as they could. They paused for a moment before he roared at them to move. Holding onto the knotted grass, he instructed Cielo to set the spark to it. She flicked her hands together again and again as sparks rained down on the dry stalks until the grass began to burn. Holding it up to his lips, Hitch blew until the sparks caught and burst into flame. Heaving it as far as she could in the direction of their pursuers, he and Cielo took off running after the others. The flames spread rapidly, seeming to leap and skip out in all directions as the air filled with thick smoke. Hitch was falling behind the others, but Cielo refused to leave his side as they pumped their legs and did their best not to choke on the smoky air they were sucking in. The wind turned for a moment, offering them some relief as it blew into their faces and carried the smoke away from them. We've got to get to a river, Hitch panted as he ran along. Tell the others, he ordered. Cielo nodded before taking off to catch up with the main group, her face set in a determined scowl as she pushed herself despite the burning sensation in her lungs. Hitch saw her up ahead, calling and waving to the others. She managed to round them up like a sheepdog before they changed tack, heading off in a different direction. Hitch assumed that someone in the group must be familiar with the area, and he managed to intercept them and fall into line at the back of the pack. Risking a look behind, he saw the wall of flame spreading out further and further until he could not take it all in. The trackers of the Dark Queen were not fools, having plied their trade hunting game and runaway slaves long before war had returned to Krynn. They knew fires did not spring to life from nowhere. They raced to try and move around the spreading flames before their path of pursuit was cut off. Used to covering long distances on foot, their stamina and endurance was impressive. The winds picked up, whipping the flames higher and faster along the plains. Keep going! Keep going! Hitch mentally screamed at himself as he felt his legs starting to buckle. He had been a much younger dwarf the last time he had tried to run any kind of distance like this, and it was his iron will alone that was keeping one foot moving in front of the other. The figures ahead were starting to get lost in the smoky haze, and he kept running in what he thought was the right direction. Suddenly, Cielo burst through the haze, heading towards him. Gripping his hand in her own, she turned and raced back after the others, half dragging him along with her. Tears started to well in his eyes, which he would later claim, if anyone had asked, were down to the damnable smoke, but the sight of his adopted daughter risking her own life to return for him filled him with pride. Water! A voice up ahead cried before the sounds of splashing came to their ears. Within the next few strides, they were through the long grass and out into the open to see the river that stretched out before them. Clambering down the banks, they waded out into the water with the others. All right, okay. Hitch gasped for air as he tried to speak, knowing that their time was potentially very short. Ditch those trees. They'll only weigh us down in the water. Everyone promptly turned to their neighbour and helped pull the fruit trees out of their packs, casting them aside. Dogs can't track your smell in the water, so we're going to go down the river as far as we can before coming out on the opposite bank and pushing on. That'll hold up the trackers as they scour the banks looking for our scent. Okay? Everyone nodded and promptly turned and started wading out into the water. In the middle of the river, they were up to their armpits, heads tilted back as they bounced on their tiptoes along with the current. The indignity, Hitch muttered to himself as he was held up in between Cielo and Turf, their arms wrapped around his waist to hold him aloft in the current. Smoke periodically billowed over them with the changing tides of the wind. The cracking sound of the flames grew closer and closer, until the riverbank itself was a blazing inferno before burning down to the damp clay and fizzling out. The fire rapidly moved along the riverbank ahead of them until they found themselves arriving just as it had burnt itself out. Fortunately, no embers were able to make it over the water and land on the other side to start the fire anew. The cool waters felt great against their skin. They relaxed as they moved with the current, the strength returning to their taxed limbs. Let's get up on the other side and get moving. Hitch called out, and the group reluctantly moved over to the other bank. Stepping out of the water, they suddenly felt like they were wearing full plate armor. The transition from floating along to standing up while wringing wet so jarring. Grumbling, they made their way up the muddy banks onto the pristine grassland beyond. Looking back, they saw the blackened ground stretching out as far as the eye could see in all directions, smoking tendrils still rising like ghosts from a graveyard at midnight. It'll take a few hours for that ground to be cool enough to move across without burning straight through the soles of their shoes. They peered into the smoke, looking for their pursuers, but could see nothing. Each praying silently, they had simply given up the chase and moved on. Wearily, they turned and began to march on. They needed to put a lot of miles between themselves and the river before they would be able to safely bed down for the night. Marching is all we seem to do, someone grumbled, the sentiment quickly taken up by the others. Humans, Hitch had learned many years ago, were always quick to point out how they were being done wrong. A good dwarf never complains. Cielo cheerfully began to lecture the assembled men as they kept marching, or allows any hardship to affect them. Hitch beamed with pride as she went on. A good dwarf takes everything in their stride, and all they ask for is more. Eyes rolled and heads were shook in disagreement until one finally summoned up the courage to speak. Maybe you didn't notice, but we are not dwarves, and neither are you, girlie. Cielo's cheeks flushed hot at the perceived insult, her fists balling in anger as they went on. Our feet hurt and our backs ache, worse than right after the summer harvest, and we are still so many miles and days away from being able to see our loved ones again. The grumbles of agreement increased in volume until Hitch feared he would have a mutiny on his hands. Taking a deep breath, he spoke. There are plenty of people in the graveyard that will happily switch places with any one of you in a heartbeat. The group fell silent for a minute. And if you don't knock this off, you'll find yourself there soon enough. They all fell silent again as they continued to walk on, the sun already starting to dip towards the horizon as they kept their ears open for the sounds of howling dogs on the wind.